Dust storms did not usually stop work on Outpost Corvus 9. But when the alarms screamed and the sky turned orange with falling debris, every worker dropped their tools and ran for cover. Daniel Rourke did not run. He stood at the edge of the landing dock and watched a shape fall out of the clouds, trailing black smoke. It was not a meteor. It was a ship. The Draconi transport hit the rocky field outside the station with a sound like the world cracking open. Metal screamed against stone. Fire lit up the dusk sky. By the time the storm passed and the rescue teams reached the wreck, there was nothing left to save. The crew compartment was crushed flat. Whoever had been flying that ship was gone. Daniel was part of the salvage crew sent out the next morning. He was not a soldier. He fixed engines, patched hulls, and kept his head down. That was how a human survived on a station where most species looked at humans the way you'd look at a stray dog. Tolerated, maybe useful, never respected. The wreck smelled of burnt metal and something sharper underneath. Daniel climbed through a torn hatch while the others picked through the cargo hold for parts worth selling. He was looking for a fuel cell when he found the pod instead. It sat in a reinforced compartment near the back, still humming faintly with power. A crack ran down one side of the shell, but the light inside blinked steady and slow, like a heartbeat that refused to stop. Daniel wiped the dust from the surface and looked in. An egg, large, the size of a beach ball, with a shell colored deep gold, veined with thin lines of amber light. It pulsed once, gently, like it knew it was being watched. "What in the stars is that?" a voice said behind him. It was Burren Holt, another human, holding a crowbar and looking half impressed, half nervous. "Draconi egg," Daniel said. He had seen pictures before. Everyone had heard of the Draconi. The dragon people, ancient and proud, feared across half the galaxy for their strength and their long, unforgiving memory. No one crossed them and lived comfortably afterward. Word spread through the salvage crew fast. By the time they got the pod back to the station, half of Corvus 9 had heard about it. A crowd gathered in the cargo bay, Kesh traders, insectoid haulers, a pair of gray-skinned merchants who dealt in rare goods. "Sell it," one trader said. "Destroy it," said another, arms crossed. "You want a full-grown dragon waking up angry in our cargo hold someday? Kill it now while it's easy." Commander Yella Vantrick, the Kesh officer who ran security on Corvus 9, pushed through the crowd and studied the pod with narrow eyes. She was practical, not cruel, but she did not like problems that could bring the Draconi Empire down on her station. "No one touches it until I decide," she said. "This isn't a debate. Back away." But arguments kept rising, voices getting louder, hands reaching toward the pod. Daniel watched the crowd close in and felt something twist in his gut. Whatever decision got made, it would not be about the small life still moving faintly behind that cracked golden shell. It would be about money, or fear, or politics. He did not think it through. He grabbed the pod, hauled it onto a cargo lifter, and walked straight out of the bay before anyone could stop him. Commander Yella shouted after him, but Daniel did not look back. Behind him, he heard Burren mutter something like, "Oh." That night, alone in his small quarters, Daniel set the pod down on his workbench and watched it in the dim light. The crack along the shell had grown wider. Small fractures spread like frost across glass. He should have called someone. A vet, a biologist, anyone who knew more. Instead, near midnight, the shell split with a soft crunch. Golden fragments fell away, and a small, wet shape uncurled from inside, no bigger than a house cat, with thin folded wings, amber scales catching the light, and eyes that opened slowly to look straight at him. It made no sound. It simply stared, trembling, too weak to move much further. Daniel had fixed engines his whole life. He had never held anything alive that needed him this badly. Something in his chest pulled tight, an instinct older than logic. He reached out slowly and let the small creature press against his hand. "All right," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. "Guess I'm not selling you." He thought for a moment, looking at her gold scales glinting like a coin caught in low light. "Sable," he said. "That's your name now." The little dragon blinked once, then closed her eyes and went still against his palm, breathing slow and shallow. Daniel did not know yet what he had just done, or how far the consequences would reach. He only knew he was not giving her up. Outside his window, the storm had passed, and Corvus 9 settled into an uneasy quiet, the kind of quiet that comes right before something big. News travels fast in a place with recycled air and thin walls. By breakfast, everyone on Corvus 9 knew that Daniel Rourke, the quiet human engineer from Bay 4, had stolen a Draconi egg and hatched it in his quarters. The laughter started in the mess hall. He named it Sable, someone said, chuckling into a cup of gray coffee substitute. Like it's a pet. Does he know what that thing grows into? Draconi hatchlings imprint on whoever raises them, another voice added. He's basically raising a war machine that'll call him daddy. Daniel ignored it as best he could, though the words followed him down every corridor. He carried Sable in a padded crate to work because he had nowhere else to leave her. She would not eat. She barely moved. Her breathing came in short, shallow pulls, and her golden scales, so bright the night she hatched, had dulled to a tired, sandy color. Commander Yella found him in the maintenance bay that afternoon, kneeling beside the crate, trying to coax the hatchling to drink water from his palm. "You do understand what you have done," Yella said, arms crossed, her tail flicking with irritation. Draconi law treats hatchling theft as a serious crime. If they ever trace this ship back to their fleet, they will come looking. And when they come, they will not care that you meant well. She was going to die in that crowd, Daniel said, not looking up. Nobody else was going to help her. That is not the point. It's the only point that matters to me. Yella studied him for a long moment, unreadable behind her reptilian eyes, then walked away without another word. It was not agreement. It was not quite a warning either. Daniel took it as permission to keep trying, since nobody had ordered him to stop. That night he stayed up building a heat chamber out of spare engine parts, old coil heaters, insulation foam, a cracked viewport from a decommissioned shuttle. Draconi eggs, he had read once in an old survey file, needed heat far beyond what any human body or station room could offer. Maybe that was why Sable was fading. She had hatched into a world too cold for her. He worked through the night, hands shaking from exhaustion, while Burren Holt leaned in the doorway shaking his head. "You know you have a shift in 4 hours," Burren said. "I know. You look like death." "I know that too." Burren sighed, grabbed a spare wrench, and knelt down to help without being asked. "You're either the bravest idiot on this station or the dumbest brave one. Haven't decided which. Does it matter?" "Not really," Burren admitted, tightening a bolt. "Just making conversation while we build a dragon incubator out of junk parts at 3 in the morning." By dawn, the chamber hummed to life, glowing a soft orange, warm as a held breath. Daniel placed Sable inside, careful not to jostle her weak little body, and watched the numbers on his makeshift thermostat climb towards something that might, finally, be right. For 2 days, nothing changed. Daniel barely slept, checking on her between shifts, ignoring the whispers that followed him everywhere. Some crew members refused to work near him, worried the Draconi search parties would blame the whole station and not just one man. Others found it funny, a human playing parent to a monster he didn't understand. Yella warned him twice more that a search might already be underway. Draconi ships did not give up easily, and losing a hatchling from a downed transport was the kind of loss their empire would not simply write off. Daniel heard all of it, and kept coming back to the chamber anyway. On the third night, as he sat slumped against the wall, half asleep, he heard a small sound. A rustle, then a soft scraping of claws against metal. He opened his eyes to see Sable pressed against the chamber glass, looking back at him. Her scales had brightened again, warm gold catching the low light, and her eyes, wide and curious now instead of glassy and dull, tracked his every movement. She was alive, more than alive. She was watching him the way a child watches the one person in the world they trust. Daniel opened the chamber slowly, and Sable crawled straight into his lap without hesitation, curling against his chest, her small body finally warm. The station could laugh all it wanted. Out here, in this cramped little room full of scavenged parts and stubborn hope, something had just been decided that no crowd, no commander, and no empire could easily undo. 2 weeks after the crash, Sable no longer fit in the crate. She had grown fast, faster than Daniel could quite believe, from something the size of a house cat to something closer to a large dog, with longer wings and sharper claws that clicked against the metal floor of his quarters. Draconi, he learned from old survey files, matured quickly in their first months, their bodies rushing to catch up to minds that were already sharp and aware. She followed him everywhere his shifts allowed. When he crouched to fix a broken vent, she crouched too, tilting her head at the same angle. When he sighed after a long day, she let out a small huffing breath, almost like she was copying him on purpose. She still had not said a single word. Not that dragons were expected to speak so young, but there was something in her silence that made people nervous. She watched everything, every face, every voice, every hand that reached toward Daniel, with sharp golden eyes that missed nothing. The mockery in the hall slowly changed into something quieter, more careful. It is one thing to laugh at a sick, dying hatchling curled in a crate. It is another thing to laugh at a creature growing bigger and stronger every single day, one that clearly understood far more than anyone expected. She's not a pet anymore, Burin said one evening, watching Sable drag a length of cable across the floor just to see what Daniel would do about it. Pets don't watch you like that. That's not curiosity. That's loyalty. Daniel didn't answer right away. He was busy untangling the cable from Sable's claws, half laughing despite himself. She's just a kid. A kid who could probably bite through that cable if she wanted to instead of playing with it. That was true, and Daniel knew it. Sable's teeth had come in sharp and full, her claws capable of scarring the metal floor if she dug in too hard. She could have hurt him a dozen times over just by accident, clumsy and unaware of her own growing strength. She never did. If anything, she seemed to soften around him on purpose, careful in a way that felt deliberate rather than instinctive. At night, when the station lights dimmed to their low sleep cycle, Sable would climb onto the end of his bunk and curl against his side, her weight settling slowly so as not to startle him. Daniel would lie there sometimes, unable to sleep, just listening to her breathing even out, feeling the warmth radiating off her scales like sitting near a low fire. He thought about the moment in the cargo bay, the crowd arguing over whether to sell her or destroy her, and felt something harden in his chest. Whatever happened next, whoever came looking for her, he was not going to be the kind of man who handed a frightened child over to strangers just because it was easier. Commander Yella visited more often now, though she claimed it was only to monitor a potential security risk. She would stand in the doorway, watching Sable investigate some new object with careful curiosity, and her stern expression would soften just slightly before she caught herself and put it away again. She is intelligent, Yella admitted one evening, arms still crossed out of habit rather than real hostility. More intelligent than most reports on Draconi hatchlings suggest. That is either good news or very bad news for you. Why bad? Because it means she understands exactly what is happening around her. And so far, everything she understands is that this station laughed at her, and you were the only one who didn't. Daniel considered that. Sable, hearing her name in the tone of the conversation, lifted her head from where she had been curled near his feet and looked between them with sharp attention, as if she, too, understood far more of the exchange than a simple animal should. That was the same night the alarms sounded again, not a storm this time, but a different signal entirely, one used for approaching ships that were not registered with the station. Yella's communicator crackled. She listened, her expression shifting from calm to grim in the span of a few seconds. Draconi scout vessel, she said quietly. Entering system range. ETA 6 hours. The room went very still. Sable, sensing the tension without understanding the words, pressed herself closer against Daniel's leg, wings tucking tight against her back, golden eyes fixed on the door as though she already knew, somewhere deep in her growing mind, that whatever came through it next would decide everything. The Draconi ship did not look like a warship, but it did not need to. It was long and dark gold, its hull carved with patterns that seemed to shift under the docking lights, and its mere presence outside the station was enough to clear the observation deck of anyone with sense. Daniel stood there anyway, Sable pressed close against his side, her wings half spread in a nervous, protective stance she had never shown before. Commander Yella met the envoy at the airlock personally, flanked by 2 of her own guards, though everyone on the station knew those guards would mean nothing if this went badly. The envoy who stepped through was tall, easily twice Daniel's height, with scales the color of old bronze and eyes that swept the room like a blade looking for something to cut. Elder Rask, Yella said, inclining her head with careful respect. We were not expecting a visit from someone of your standing. You were expecting nothing, Rask said, his voice low and even. Because you assumed the theft of a Draconi hatchling would go unnoticed. That assumption was foolish. He did not waste time on further pleasantries. Word had reached him, he explained, that a transport carrying a single unhatched egg had gone missing near this system, and that scavengers from this very station had been seen looting the wreck. If the egg had survived, Draconi law demanded its immediate return, along with the surrender of whoever had taken it. Yella's eyes flicked toward Daniel, just once, but it was enough. Rask followed the glance and found Daniel standing near the back of the room, Sable pressed against his leg. The elder's expression did not change, but something in the air did. He crossed the deck slowly, guards falling into step behind him, until he stood only a few feet from Daniel and looked down at the hatchling with something between disbelief and disgust. So this is what has become of her, Rask said. Raised by a scavenger. No incubation chamber, no bonding rites, no elders to guide her first months. It's a miracle she survived it all. She almost didn't, Daniel said. Nobody else was trying to save her. You misunderstand, Rask said, sharper now. This is not gratitude you deserve. This is theft. A Draconi hatchling belongs to her people, not to whichever stranger happens to find her first. She will be returned to proper care, and you will answer for what you have done. He gestured, and two of his guards stepped forward. Daniel did not move. Sable, sensing the guards approaching, let out a low sound in her throat, something between a growl and a whine, and pressed herself even tighter against his leg, wings flaring slightly wider. She was dying, Daniel said, keeping his voice steady even as his pulse hammered. I didn't take her from anyone. I pulled her out of a wreck that killed everyone else on that ship. If I had waited for someone with proper training to show up, she would have been dead before they arrived. A convenient story, Rask said. It's the truth. Ask your own people how long a Draconi egg can survive outside incubation. I built a heat chamber out of scrap parts because there wasn't anything else available. If that's theft, then fine, call it theft. But I'm not handing her over to be dragged onto a ship by force while she's terrified. Rask's eyes narrowed. Her feelings are not your concern to protect. They are exactly my concern, Daniel said. That's what happens when you spend 3 weeks keeping something alive. You start caring whether it's terrified or not. The guards took another step. Sable's growl deepened, and for the first time, small wisps of heat curled from her nostrils, a warning sign even Daniel had never seen before. The observation deck, crowded now with curious onlookers who had gathered despite the danger, went utterly silent. Stand down, Rask said to his guards, though his tone made clear this was not mercy, only patience running thin. He studied Sable a moment longer, taking in her stance, her raised wings, the way she had planted herself firmly between Daniel and the approaching soldiers despite being barely a few months old. Interesting, he said quietly, almost to himself. Very interesting. Then, louder, to the room, she has clearly bonded to something. That much is obvious. Whether that bond is real, or simply fear and confusion mistaken for loyalty, remains to be seen. He turned back to Daniel, eyes cold and assessing. There is one way to know for certain, and if I am right about what I suspect, human, you will not enjoy the answer nearly as much as you think you will. Daniel had no idea what that meant, but Sable, trembling faintly against his leg, let out a small sound that was almost like a word trying to form. Elder Rask ordered the deck cleared of anyone who did not need to be there, but few people actually left. They pressed against the walls and doorways instead, unwilling to miss whatever was about to happen. Daniel could feel dozens of eyes on him, on Sable, on the 2 Draconi guards who now stood only a few paces away, waiting for a signal. There is a test, Rask explained, his tone clinical now, almost bored, as though he had done this 100 times before. Draconi hatchlings bond in stages. First to warmth, then to safety. Then, if the bond is genuine, to a single guardian they recognize above all others. That final stage reveals itself in one way only. What way? Daniel asked. She speaks, Rask said. Her first word. It is not taught. It is not trained. It emerges on its own, directed at whoever she has truly chosen to call her own. If she has bonded to fear and confusion, as I suspect, she will say nothing, because there will be no one to say it to. If, somehow, She has bonded to you specifically. She will speak your name, or the closest word she has for what you are to her. And if she doesn't? Rast's expression did not soften. Then there is no bond to protect, and she returns with me tonight. Daniel looked down at Sable, who was staring up at him with wide golden eyes, wings still slightly raised, breath still coming fast from the tension in the room. He knelt slowly, ignoring the guards, ignoring Rask, ignoring every pair of eyes fixed on him, and put a hand gently against her side. "Hey," he said quietly, just for her. "It's all right. Whatever happens, I'm right here." She pressed her head against his hand, trembling, and for a long moment nothing happened at all. The silence stretched. Somewhere near the back of the crowd, someone shifted their weight, and the sound seemed impossibly loud. Rask's patience thinned visibly. He raised a hand toward his guards, a signal to move in and take her regardless. That was when Sable moved first. She scrambled fully behind Daniel, small wings snapping open wide, placing her whole body between him and the approaching guards, and let out a sound that was not quite a roar and not quite a cry, something raw and desperate and entirely her own. Then, clear enough for the whole deck to hear, she spoke. "Dad." The word landed like a dropped tool in a silent room. For a moment nobody moved. Even the guards froze mid-step, glancing toward Rask for instruction he did not immediately give. Daniel turned slowly, kneeling fully now, and found Sable pressed against him, still shaking, her golden eyes locked on his face with a kind of desperate certainty that needed no translation. "Sable," he said, voice unsteady in a way he hadn't expected. "Say that again." "Dad," she said again, quieter this time, almost questioning, as though checking whether it was allowed. "Yeah," Daniel said, pulling her against his chest despite her growing size, despite the sharp claws and warm breath and everything about her that should have felt strange and did not. "Yeah, that's right." Around them, the crowd that had gathered to watch a scavenger get punished instead watched something entirely different unfold. Whispers spread fast, translated between species in hurried, hushed tones. Even Burin, near the front of the crowd, had gone completely still, one hand pressed over his mouth. Elder Rask stood motionless, and for the first time since stepping off his ship, something like uncertainty crossed his sharp features. "That is not possible," he said, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "You said it yourself," Yella cut in quietly, stepping forward from where she had been watching near the wall. "The bond cannot be faked, cannot be forced. It reveals itself on its own." Rask said nothing for a long moment, staring at the small dragon pressed protectively against a human scavenger's chest, still shaking, still murmuring the same word over and over like she was testing whether it was true. "Draconi law," he finally said, each word heavy and reluctant, "recognizes the bond as sacred, unbreakable by force, unbreakable by decree." He looked at Daniel, something unreadable behind his ancient eyes. "Even by me." The observation deck, so recently filled with fear and mockery and cold calculation, had gone utterly, completely silent, waiting to see what an elder of the Draconi Empire would do now that the law he had come to enforce had just turned itself against him. Elder Rask did not leave immediately. He stood on the observation deck for a long while, watching Daniel hold Sable, the ancient bond having settled something in the room that no argument or threat could have managed. When he finally spoke again, his voice had lost its earlier edge, replaced with something more careful, more weight. "Understand what has happened here," he said, addressing Daniel directly now, guards standing down behind him. "This bond is not a small thing. It is recognized across every Draconi world, in every court, by every clan. She has chosen you as her guardian, and that choice cannot be undone by me, by her birth clan, or by the Empire itself. Not without her consent, and even then, rarely. So she stays with me," Daniel said, still kneeling, one hand resting on Sable's back, where she had finally begun to calm. "She stays with you," Rask confirmed, though the words clearly cost him something. "But do not mistake this for a simple victory. Word of this will travel fast. Some among my people will honor the old law without question. Others will not. There are clans who see a human-bonded hatchling as an insult, a precedent that threatens tradition itself. They may come here, not to negotiate, but to erase the problem entirely." Daniel felt a chill at that. but he did not let it show on his face, not with Sable still watching him so closely. Then we deal with that if it happens. You misunderstand your position, Rask said, though not unkindly now. You cannot deal with it alone. A hatchling raised without any connection to her people, her history, her instincts, is a hatchling vulnerable in ways you cannot protect her from, no matter how much you care for her. He paused, studying Sable for a long moment, something almost like respect settling into his expression. I propose an arrangement, Rask continued. The Empire recognizes you as her rightful guardian, formally, under law. In exchange, Draconi teachers will visit this station regularly, to train her in the ways of her people, to teach her what she needs to know to survive and grow into what she is meant to become. You raise her. We help guide her. Both, together. Daniel looked down at Sable, who had gone quiet, watching the exchange with the same sharp attention she always did, understanding more than her small size suggested. She's not losing me, Daniel said. Not for tradition, not for training, not for anything. If that's part of the deal, it's off the table. No one is asking you to give her up, Rask said. I'm asking you to let her have both. A father and a heritage. There is no reason she cannot have all of it, if you are willing to allow it. Daniel thought about the crowd that had once laughed at him in the mess hall, the whispered bets on how long the hatchling would survive, the commander who had warned him, the guards who had nearly taken her by force only minutes ago. None of that had changed who Sable was, or what she needed. It had only made him more certain. All right, he said finally. Teach her. But she comes home to me every night. That's not negotiable. Rask inclined his head, something almost like the beginning of respect in the gesture. Agreed. Word of the agreement spread through Corvus 9 within hours, and the mockery that had once followed Daniel through every corridor faded into something quieter, more thoughtful. People who had laughed now watched him differently, unsure what to make of a scavenger who had faced down a Draconi elder and walked away with his daughter still in his arms. That evening, Daniel stood on the observation deck with Sable beside him, her wings stretched out fully for the first time, testing muscles still too young to carry her far. She turned her head toward him, golden eyes catching the light of the setting system star beyond the viewport. Dad, she said again, steadier now, more sure of the word each time she used it. Yeah, Daniel said, smiling despite everything the day had cost him. I'm right here. Somewhere beyond the station, the Draconi envoy ship prepared to depart, carrying word back to a distant empire that a new kind of bond had just been recognized, one the old laws had never quite planned for. And on Corvus 9, a small golden dragon let out her first real cry into the open air, not loud, not fierce, but full of something that sounded very much like the beginning of a promise.